Hello, everyone. I'm Alanah, and I am joined by Patricia Hernandez today, who is the new editor-in-chief of Kotaku. New-ish. It's not that new
hmm
now. It's been a while. And I just wanted to talk to you about the state of games media, what it's like taking over a website right now, and the letter from the editor that you released basically when you took on this new role, which congrats, by the way, but also just
You.
basically, for my starting question, what is your goal with Kotaku, and what do you do when you have the opportunity to become the editor in chief of a major video game website at this point in time?
Uh, I think that's the daily question, right? Right now, it's a little bit of just ambient terror in realizing how much power I technically have, which is like a weird thing to say, but like it's
It's a
it's
lot of
weird because like
influence
if I
potentially.
yeah, it's weird because like if I describe the stuff in the letter about like wanting to do things differently and like wanting to like not just because I feel like there's just a lot of like very rote coverage in games media, like, every time Fortnite announces a crossover, it's a headline, but they've announced like 10 this week. They've announced so many this week. And I would like to imagine that there's a world in which games media doesn't have to do that. I think in a lot of cases when games media tries writing for like everyone, they end up writing for like no one.
Mm,
Um, and in practice, like I don't know. Kotaku has the tagline that's like the gamer's guide, right? And we used to take that very seriously in the sense that like I don't know, like considering what the gamer would want to read, right? Like, and usually that meant like we have to cover all the big games, because
mm.
that's what people expect when they load off the site. They if a big company announces a big game, it's going to be on the page. And now I'm just kind of the mind where it's like, well, I don't know what the purpose of that is. Like I know that the people that I've hired are talented, and I don't know that I want to waste their talents just like
Rewriting press
regurgitating.
releases.
Yeah, yeah. And like, on a day like today, I was talking about this in Twitter a little bit, but I deleted the tweet because I felt like it was being taken very poorly by some people, where like there's some leaks about the new Call of Duty, and then there's like something about the new Battlefield mode, which like there's nothing wrong with those games, but given that we only have like a handful of writers right now, and there are all
Mm.
these like big, like complicated stories that are breaking, it seems like a better use of our time to focus on like the things that we can report originally versus like
Some
the
leaks.
new Call of Duty that I mean, you would expect a new Call of Duty every year, right? Like in that
Mm.
sense. But I said this on Twitter, and some people were like, well, like it's weird that I can't go to Kotaku for that sort of stuff. Like, why, like, are you telling me that I have to go somewhere else to learn about the news? Which is kind of like a hard question because it's, I guess in a perfect world, maybe we would be like experts on like everything. But from my viewpoint, I know that we've always left a ton of games on the table while like convincing everyone that like we're the gamer's guide and like we cover all the biggest stories or whatever. But like what is considered important, usually the scope is very small, right? Like you could have a website that's like entirely just like patch notes of all the biggest games because they change every week or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that we won't publish patch notes because, sometimes they're interesting, but I just want to get to a point where the choices that we make feel intentional and not just, well, this is what we've always done,
And we have
it's
to.
what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's an interesting conundrum to have, especially when you do have a limited amount of writers and you're also competing with Twitter. Like, that was the thing that became obvious to me even as I was leaving IGN that I feel like has only gotten worse now is the amount of people who can cover something before you can get it up on Kotaku. There's already several tweets out, there's an image out. Everyone's already got that news. So is it
Yeah.
valuable at the end of the day? Like it's already all over every other platform. Of course, not everyone uses Twitter. We were just saying that before we started
Right.
recording.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is an interesting thing. And I remember when Halo Infinite got delayed, I had that news at the same time as probably every journalist, but I got a video up before any of the major games media websites did because I'm just one person and I can record to a camera and hit send. But there's so much that needs to happen when you
hmm
run a games site to get that news up at the same amount of time. It became very, very clear to me as I was leaving IGN. It's like, we are so fucking slow when it comes
Yeah.
to news that I don't know if it's even valuable anymore to try to compete with YouTubers. And that was a question that I wanted to ask that you sort of brought up there is how much do you consider, the way people on Twitch are covering games and the way people on YouTube are covering games as competition or as a way to grow? Like, how do you look at that
Yeah.
side of the industry?
I think I mean, everyone likes to pose journalists as in competition with like influencers and stuff. And I can see why people do that. And especially if you're like a YouTuber who's like kind of like has like a very like abrasive personality, I think it's kind of in your favor to draw up targets, right? To like draw a line in the sand, and then fans get very like, the whole thing with parasocial relationships. It's hard for me to look at, I don't know, like Twitch influencers or YouTubers as competition, and it's not because out of like lack of respect or anything like that, but because we report on them, right? So
Hmm.
like, I don't know, we cover them. I think we consider them more like a part of the in like big influential people in the industry that like in some ways are, I know this is going to get taken out of context, but like are more well known than the average game developer, I guess,
It's
which,
true.
there are problems with that being true, but like I think it says a lot that like, I don't know, Dr. Disrespect just announced a new studio, and it's like specifically to pair influencers with games and stuff. Like, yeah, I don't know. I think our priorities are very different, right? Like you don't have to break news as a YouTuber, although you can. Whereas I think the expectation at a site like Kotaku, or at least so far, has been that like we're very tied with news, right? Telling you what's going to happen before it's out there, and stuff like that. And a lot of times I feel like it's kind of like a not a symbiotic relationship, but like if we break news, usually what happens is the YouTuber will cover it and they'll give their opinions, and like while
It's a
people
different
will probably
format
follow, yeah, yeah.
for sure. Because they got
Um,
to get those 10-minute videos out so they can get the ads in. But to jump off of that, I mean, how do you feel about the state of games media right now, just in general? Where is it at, and how do you feel about it?
I feel frustrated about it a lot, but it's weird because I look at what's out there right now, and objectively there's like more types of writing now than there ever has been, for more types of voices and stuff, like, and also just like more better reporting. I feel like everyone's kind of within the last year seeing how important it is to actually have like sources and all this other stuff to like be able to tell these complicated sensitive stories that like are shrouded in a lot of like NDAs and stuff like that. But I think my frustration with it is born out of love, right? Like feeling like we could be doing more interesting stuff, feeling a little bit of jealousy that sometimes, like we have to make decisions as to like what a good use of our time is, and
Mm,
maybe this has not happened during my tenure at Kotaku, but I've definitely seen situations where it's like, do I cover this small game that no one knows, or do I cover the thing that I know is going to do traffic? And in the best world, you balance a little bit of the two, right? But yeah, I think it's just very easy to like only care about the things that you know. Like, I feel like there's not a lot of starting conversations. There's a lot of trying to follow trends
yeah.
is what I perceive. But at the same time, I look at sites like Polygon and IGN, they're led by like very smart people. Like I don't think that the state of games media is like, well, obviously it's not malicious. Like no one wants to create a thing that feels boring or rote, right?
Hmm.
I think maybe where we are a little different is that yes, technically we are a news site, but I also just have like little personal investment in being seen as like professional and stuff like that. Like I think it's more important for me to feel like you are reading something true when you go to the website than it is in feeling like, I don't know, we are capital J journalists, even though obviously we are. I
I
feel like it's
understand. I
probably,
completely
yeah.
understand what you're trying to say. Completely. Because there are restrictions that come with being capital J fancy journalist that I think don't necessarily speak to the average gamer either. There are restrictions that you can place on yourself with that kind of thing. Like, for example, with the Kotaku headline that had shit in it. Uh,
Uh-huh.
I understood the criticism with that and had my own criticisms, but my criticism was not actually the word shit, Because I don't understand why, when we know the kind of people who play video games, why it was like this pearl clutching thing that Kotaku said shit. I again get the criticism of it being a very negative thing, but at the same time, it was very confusing to me because YouTube is appraised for being that negative
Oh
at
my
the same time,
God.
and it's a
Yeah,
bad game.
there's
But it was definitely a thing that it was like, why are we against? We play video games; they're full of swear words. Gamers probably swear a fair amount on the whole. It's very odd to be upset about the word shit being used
it
in a
did take
Kotaku
me a
headline.
little aback at the level of response to that. I mean, not to wash my hands of it, but I wasn't like involved in the decision making for that headline. But I think even if I had been, I would not have anticipated the quite that reaction. And I get it, I get it on a lot of different levels. Like we we do curse. I would like to be a little bit more selective on it. I don't know if the some random mobile game was like worth pulling a thing that is supposed to only be like, but on the other hand, I know I would have felt something if like Luke wrote like a very straightforward headline and then tweeted it like this game is shit.
Mm,
And then I'd be like, well, why isn't that in the reflected like from the second that before you even click on the story?
sure.
Um, but I also know that like yeah, from the game developer side, I kind of understand that obviously you don't that's not like the most what is the word polite
Not
thing.
terribly constructive, not terribly
Yeah.
supportive. Like
Well, yeah,
I really did get the criticism.
yeah, yeah. And see, that's an interesting question to me too, because like in many ways, it's not our job to fix the industry, but that doesn't mean that we can't contribute to it. Because like, right, like what role does reporting take? It can be used in cases or whatever. Like it can help people. Or there's this whole concept of like solutions-based journalism. Like there are pathways to do it, but I also think the conversation gets a little muddied when it's like I don't like considering us a part of the industry, which in some ways I guess we are if we're talking about like influencers and stuff like that. But I think I would rather consider myself like outside of the industry trying
Hmm.
to look in, which has its limits, but I think that's part of where that came from, where it's like, well, you're not being very constructive. And it's like, well, I don't know, you're 2K. You pay focus testers, you fix it.
Hmm.
But I get it, right? Like, yeah, if you just I what got explained to me, not that it needed to be explained, was like kind of feeling like developers are constantly reading like very just like acerbic shit over like nothing, right? Like that's
Yeah.
the basis of any conversation where like I don't know, you nerf a character or something and suddenly people are like yelling at you for no reason. So in that sense, I kind of get that it's like, oh, big account also kind of sounding like a, I don't know, like a redditor or something. Like
Yeah,
I
like someone who
yeah,
tweets at them.
yeah, yeah. So in that sense, I kind of get it.
The,
But I mean,
the the tough decisions to make. That's the thing. Is like thinking about how to approach this kind of stuff is a lot harder than I think anyone realizes. It is very tough, and also I've definitely had the thing of writing something when I was at IGN and people being mad, and I was like, I did not see this one coming. Like I was like,
yeah.
oh my god, I did not know they'd be upset about that. They're always so convinced that you knew what you were doing when you were publishing this. Is like,
Oh my God, yes. I feel like I get some of the wildest accusations on Twitter where I'm like, okay, clearly we don't agree, but I wish you weren't writing this weird fan fiction about like my motivations. You can just say that you don't like why you don't
yeah,
agree with the
yeah,
thing.
drives me nuts. To circle back a little bit,
Mhm.
this is a pretty broad question, but what actual purpose do you think games media should serve?
Man, I feel like the way that I look at it is I wake up every day kind of hoping to entertain people or at least drive their curiosity.
Hmm.
Sometimes that might be, informing them of like truths that they might not be able to get otherwise because we have access. But like, I don't know. It's funny that like there's this sense that games journalists are like this very like unhappy, very like pessimistic bunch when I feel like the reason that we like games is because we like to have fun, I assume is somewhere in there. And yeah, I would rather wake up and like find like the cool weird thing in the new Pokemon game than like deliver you news that I don't know, some assault has happened somewhere.
Sure.
And I don't know if that maybe drives like I don't know if I should be looking at myself more as like a journalist first and foremost, because technically that is what we are. But I think I look at it more as like if we can get paid to write for a living, I want to make that writing feel worthwhile or interesting or like
Mhm.
the in the best possible scenario, I'm like sharing a thing that I'm excited about or that I think there's value in, and then you can like you can also maybe learn that like you love this thing that you didn't know that you loved or like are willing to try a new thing like. But at the same time, yeah, I do think that there's like a responsibility with the platform, right? So using and aside from entertaining, also using our voice wisely, taking punches when needed.
Jumping off of that, what are the hardest parts of the job? The things that people you think don't see or don't know about? The things that are just huge silent challenges.
I would say that just the sheer amount of time both to report or even become like an expert in a game, right?
Mm.
Like I think it's very easy to criticize if like because think about how games live out in the world, right? I think the average person isn't playing like 10 different games every week to go along with the releases. They're probably going to play like a handful of things. Usually, probably what happens is that people are very focused on a single game, right? And so
I think
you
it's
play it to
3
hell
a
and back.
year was the last
Yeah.
stat that I read. Most people get very into 3 games per year.
So think about that
Seems like
though,
nothing.
right? Like there are many different implications there, but one of the most pressing ones I think for a game journalist is the average person might genuinely know a game better than you do. And it's not because you're not good at your job, it's because our jobs are to like kind of know a little bit of everything. And
Hmm.
if you have been playing League of Legends for the last 6 years, like of course you're going to know that game better than probably most mainstream journalists, I should say.
It's an interesting point. It's like you can get criticism for not knowing something with the amount of depth of someone who only plays that one thing all day, every day, but they couldn't do your job because they don't play enough games. But how do you communicate that without being like, well, yeah, you do know this game better than me?
There are, yeah, sometimes I see controversies pop up where it's like, you criticize something in the game and it's like, well, in the 85th hour, if you had done this, then you would have gotten this ending, and that's not actually what happens, but you didn't play the game correctly. And it's just like, oh, like I feel like the standards that are being put out there are just so unrealistic, and especially when like the a good modern game either never ends because it's continually updated or like I don't know, think of the average Assassin's Creed game and how long it takes to experience everything in that game. I it yeah, I think that the time commitment, which is funny because we consider it so important to report on crunch, and yet I think I do not know of a single person that like works decent hours.
No, there are massive struggles there, and things that I think people don't see. And one thing that I'd love to ask you about, because I've always said that even when I was an editor at IGN, it's not that I didn't care; it's that I didn't obsess over it in the way that the public thought. How much attention are you actually paying to clicks? How much attention are you
Mm,
actually paying to, especially in your job role,
mhm.
to here's how many views the site got in this day? Because of course, when I was a writer in games media, I was writing about trending games, but I wasn't going, I need 100,000 views. I just didn't think about anything that way.
Well, that's an interesting question because, I came up during the Gawker days and it was very cutthroat. Like when you would walk into the office, not that I was in the office, but like this, just to give you a sense of the environment, like you would walk in and there would immediately be like a leaderboard with like the top stories. And
Hmm.
while that changed iterations, there was always some version of it back when it was like Nick Denton and stuff like that. And like, you know, the, I think about like what type of people gamers are, right? And like at the end of the day, I do think we are kind of numbers people. We're like, what do we do in games, right? We go and optimize and like try to get like the best possible gear and stuff like that. All of this to say is that I do pay attention, but I also think it can't be the end all be all of whether or not something is worth covering because then yeah, you just end up covering the same shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably in like things like Chartbeat, which is the thing that like tracks the numbers and stuff, like more than I should be, but I also partially do it so that the writers don't have to worry about it. Like I do not want a world in which, you know, someone is not going to pitch something that they actually care about just because they don't think it's going to do well.
Mm-hmm.
Like at our best, we do the stuff that we know is going to do well to give us a cushion to do the stuff that we care about. And sometimes they
Yeah.
intersect, that they're not always like at odds or you know, like I'm a big Pokemon fan, and so and Pokemon generally does numbers, but I'm not writing it because it does numbers. I'm just like already in the fandom and such. So
I'll ask you my last question then. What do you want Kotaku's relationship with the audience to be?
you know, that's a good question, and one that I've been thinking about a lot recently within the context of like people kind of feeling like we've been maybe more negative recently. I don't want like a combative relationship, which I think sometimes happens because we write about things that matter and people have very strong opinions about,
Sure.
I don't know, like any anything, race, religion, whatever. Um, but I would like to get to like a point where people can disagree, but like in a civil way. I want to have a relationship with readers where they trust that even if we do not agree, that like we're not saying or writing stuff just for the clicks or just to make, there's like a lot of times when we write stuff and it's like you were just trying to get people mad or like you were just trying to get a reaction out of people. And I guess I want to get to the point with readers, relationship with readers where they trust our motivations a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
because which is hard because I think just generally mainstream media, there's a lot of like skepticism and like distrust, right? Like
Sure.
after 4 years of fake news or whatever. So tall order, but hopefully maybe we can get to that point. And I think it's going to require like a lot of thinking about like how to build community, how to like the word prune is coming to mind, but that's probably not the best word. I want to have a good relationship, but I think it's going to take work to like find and build the community, which is hard when we don't have like a community manager. But you know, when we're talking about ambitions, yeah, in a perfect world, we have like more of a give and take with readers.
It sounds like you have your work cut out for you, but you very clearly care a lot. And obviously that's important. And
A
I say that,
curse. No, that's a
but I say that
curse.
as
I
someone
don't.
who's worked with the ICs who I don't think have cared that much. So,
Oh,
I
boy, I
just,
wish that were me.
yeah, I was going to say, I just hope that you don't burn yourself to the ground in the process of caring a lot, but I appreciate that you do.
Well, we'll see. I figure I give it a few. I feel like I've aged like three times at three times the pace over the last 3 months. So we'll see how long this pace lasts. But you know, you're not giving an opportunity like this very often. So I figure if I'm going to go all out, if I'm going to burn out, it might as well be for something that's like worth it. So
I don't
hopefully,
love that, but I also understand where you're coming from. I
I don't
want to
want to.
tell
I don't
you
want to burn
to
out, but I'm
not.
just saying.
I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you for joining me, Patricia. Where can people find you? And do you have anything that the site is up to right now that you want to promote?
Yeah, we have some good scoops on the site. You should check out Kotaku.com. We just wrote about QA testers at Activision Blizzard, very dire stories, but also, you know, fun stuff like good mobile ads. So yeah, visit Kotaku.com. I'm on Twitter. I think my username is xpatriciah.
It is.
I mostly tweet about Pokemon and keyboards. So be warned.
I will leave links in the description below. And thank you for joining me.
Of course.
And
Yeah,
thank you
thank
all
you for
for
having
watching.
me.
Bye.
Bye.